Hey, good evening and welcome. This is the Seattle King County NAACP. This is their first legislative town hall. I want to welcome you all. We will be recording this event to later post on our social media pages, so just a heads up about that. My name is Stephan Thomas, and I'm going to be the moderator for this evening. I am a lawyer. I am a former King County prosecutor. I was there for about 8 years. I now work for an organization called Prosecutor Impact, where I work to transform the criminal justice system. Before I introduce our speakers for the evening, I want to share with you the format for this event. Each speaker will be given 5 minutes to introduce themselves, talk about bills or policies that they sponsored, and ways they plan on helping their districts for the remainder of their term. After each speaker introduces themselves, we will then spend the remainder of the town hall asking them questions. And what an honor it is to be able to have representatives here, folks that look like us, that understand our needs, our thoughts, our feelings, and they're going to share with us some of the policies that they're supporting, the bills that they're working on. Now, you can submit questions in the Q&A section at any time during the town hall. That can be questions for all the speakers or one in particular. And as this town hall is sponsored by the NAACP, we encourage your questions to be centered around civil rights. First, we are going to have Rebecca Saldaña, who represents the 37th district since 2016. We are then going to have Councilmember Girmay Zahilay, who represents King County's 2nd district. And then lastly, we're going to hear from Kirsten Harris-Talley. So with that said, I'm going to pass it to you, Senator, to share bills that you're supporting, things that you're working on, and really just kind of like your overall vision for your position in the 37th legislative district. I'll pass it to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's so good to be with you all. Thank you for hosting this forum. And just so you know, on the other screen, we are voting on the Senate floor. So I will be making sure I'm kind of keeping track. So I might be a little bit more distracted than I normally would. But I want to start by acknowledging that we are on Duwamish, Coast Salish land, and that that they continue to be here, that continue to be partners in making sure that we are addressing justice for our land and for our peoples, and that we are accountable to one another. I want to also recognize that today is Dolores Huerta Day in Washington State, thanks to legislation that was passed a couple of years ago. This is our year to celebrate her and her legacy as the co-founder of the United Farm Workers of America, and a true inspiration to me. And then. And that's actually one of the bills that we got to vote on this last, I think it was yesterday, was to make Juneteenth a state holiday, to make sure that we are recognizing holidays that are really about centering the kind of country we want to become, which is actually one that respects and centers Black lives, and that is about making sure that we are actually all free. I would say that is definitely part of the honor of being able to represent a district like the 37th is really, that is part of my my value statement, I guess, is to make sure that, you know, I'm not free unless all our people are free. So you'll see in my background, Archbishop Romero, the people of El Salvador, and, you know, recognizing the impact of imperialism and capitalism and colonialism, this injustices to one of our peoples impacts all of us. And that is, of course, seen in the pandemic of that we can't hoard vaccines, that we need to make sure that people most vulnerable are receiving those vaccines, and that while I'm here representing your district, the 37th, which includes Central District, International Chinatown, includes Beacon Hill, Rainier Valley, unincorporated King County, and downtown Renton. And I'm here only legislating on state level pieces of legislation, but we are connected as one, and so we have to do work together. And I'll just say this is one thing with Councilmember Zahilay being next, is how do we make sure that there's no wrong door for community, that when they come to us with a grievance, with a concern, that if it isn't our position doesn't have that direct say, that we're making those connections for community and being more responsive. I think the other piece in terms of kind of a thread that I try to hold on to no matter what position I'm in is creating pathways of opportunity and breaking down barriers, whether those are physical barriers or systemic barriers, institutional barriers that prevent people from being their full selves and being able to realize their potential and the brilliance that they are. Regardless of where they started from, but that each of us have that potential. And so I tend to focus a lot of my work around economic barriers. So that's addressing the fact that we have that we exempt people from overtime, that we exempt certain workers and industries from full worker protections. That has been a big issue for me, whether it's working for farm workers or janitors or domestic workers, is recognizing that there's a legacy of racism and intention to exclude based on whether that's women's work or was historically slavery, done by with people that weren't getting paid, or immigrants and refugees. And so making sure that we're creating opportunities for people to have their work be respected and dignified. So that is a big part of my focus. It looks like we're going to caucus. Sorry. And so this year, a couple of bills are, I know that is the HEAL Act 5141. I'm hoping the House is going to take that up today, which makes sure that environmental justice is centered into all how agencies consider work, establishes an environmental justice council and an interagency council to make sure that that implementation happens with EJ principles. Also, another bill that the House passed yesterday is to remove the exemption of overtime for agricultural workers in Washington State. And that has been on the books since the New Deal and is really a legacy of Jim Crow policies. And we have allowed that to be part of our legal system in here, Washington State, for years. And so that would be another one. I already feel like I took too much time. So, and I know there's specific bills or policies that people want us to, so I'm going to pass the mic.
All right, cool. Hey, before Councilmember Girmay goes, brother, if you don't mind, if we allow Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley to go next. She's on a break. And one, I want to just say that you guys are the ultimate multitaskers. I've never been in a forum where someone's like, I'm voting on a Senate bill and I'm having this conversation at the same time. Like, that stuff is not part of my normal parlance. And so it's amazing. I'm going to throw it to you, Representative Harris-Talley. We're talking about bills that you're sponsoring, your overall vision for your district. What is your why for being a representative? I will toss it to you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry, and you got 5 minutes. I apologize. You got 5 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for having us. The legacy of the NAACP, I feel like, is all over what we are working on in leg session this year. So I just want to say that the Seattle chapter particularly, we do so many firsts as a chapter here. So thank you for your work. I'm Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley, she, her pronouns, and I'm the newest addition to our delegation here in the 37th. I'm really proud to be joining this year. I'm one of 9 Black representatives at the state level, the largest assembly of Black representatives we've had in our state history. Despite having our first assembly in 1889 include a Black representative, Representative Bush, we are also 9 of only 25 who have served over that time. And I want to recognize that the great Senator Noble serves with my colleague, Senator Saldaña, as the only Black representative in the Senate. So a lot of work with you all and others in community to help us all in doing that. I'm really excited to serve on the Finance Committee in the House, which includes conversations about revenue, so what dollars are coming in, who pays it, and how, as well as tax policy. I've had a really clear focus there on equity in our tax policy. Like many institutions, that was not policy that was built with Black folks, our needs, and how we are particularly discriminated against economically in mind. So a lot of considerations about our upside down tax code and what that means for folks in district is really important to me. I'm really proud to have introduced this year in that committee the anti-displacement property tax exemption, House Bill 1494. It looks at having a up to $250,000 tax exemption on your home of residence on the state portion of your property taxes. As everyone here knows, we saw aunties, families so deeply displaced out of district in 2006, 7, 8, and 9. We saw folks who own their homes outright get displaced. And the reason was because they couldn't keep up with the property taxes, even though they own those homes outright. And disproportionately, that fell down on Black folks, Black elders. It accelerated a lot of the discrimination and what we've seen in gentrification, moving folks out. I'm proud to serve in the 37th district, but I do have to recognize that the Central District used to be the largest concentration of Black families in Washington State. That is now Skyway, which just gives you an illumination of what gentrification has looked like. So really proud to work on those issues there. I also serve as vice chair of the Children, Youth, and Families Committee. Anything that doesn't go through education that impacts young people at the state level goes through that committee in the House. And I've had particular focus on juvenile justice situations and policy there. We've had a lot of additions and changes to policy there, considerations of courts. We're actually going to be voting on a bill out of the Senate that came to our committee looking at setting up courts for infants age 0 to 3. Me and other members of the Black Members Caucus took sharp focus there, knowing how dependency in our courts has displaced so many Black children from our families. And we wanted to make sure to mitigate harm in that. So a lot of voice, even on policy that one of us doesn't write, to make sure that our families are seen and recognized in those sorts of policies. I have a particular focus of a proviso that I'm hoping will make it all the way through the budget process. That's going to be looking at electronic monitoring. We do not have the same definition for youth around that. We've obviously had robust conversations about that with the No New Youth Jail movement here that I was proud to be a part of in my activism before serving in this role. And as we're moving from brick and mortar incarceration to youth to electronic monitoring, the new Jim Crow is that growing edge, as you all know very well. So really keeping a close eye that what we're not doing is actually still incarcerating youth disproportionately, particularly Black youth and Black young men. But that we're actually ending that practice and not just transitioning it to electronic monitoring. So I would love folks' collaboration in that work. For the proviso, I think it'll start giving us the baseline information of what we need to do as a state in that. And then I also serve on the Environment and Energy Committee. We're actually going to hear Senator Saldaña's HEAL Act bill today. I'm very excited. I also get to speak on that bill later this evening. So folks after this want to be entertained and watch TVW. We'll be legislating well into the night tonight. But the HEAL Act was shaped by Black, Brown, Indigenous folks right here in district, many of them. It's been a long time coming. Great policy that's looking at what it is to have environmental justice, the voices of those most impacted centered in the solutions that we're going to have at the state level. So I thank Senator Saldaña for that work, and I'm excited to be part of the folks on the House who are going to get that through and hopefully on the governor's desk this year. And also want to thank every advocate who's been a part of that work. I also want to note that we talk about energy in that committee and the energy impacts. It would be remiss of me not to talk about, we can't talk about the energy environment and not talk about how Black folks are impacted. The asthma rates amongst Black youth in our district is astronomical. And we cannot just be talking about parts per billion carbon when we're talking about climate. We need to talk about lived outcomes and people's lived experience. And folks here know that work really well. I'm really proud that we have so many environmental justice groups right here in district leading that work. So I've really tried to have a clear focus in everything we do about raising issues of community advocacy, making sure we're following the lead of stakeholders and groups who are doing the work on the ground so that the policies we're shaping really reflect what'll help make people's everyday lives better. So very excited. I've talked to many neighbors I know who work with, volunteer with, do work with, and have for many years with NAACP. Please keep reaching out to our office. I'll make sure to put my email in the chat. We'll be working diligently on all these issues through interim as well, and just would love to collaborate with you all. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Representative Harris-Talley. You know, you said so many great things. One of the things that stood out to me, though, is that, you know, that so much of our policies and laws were not designed with Black folks and people of color in mind, right? And so you are now having to make that correction. And it reminds me of something that Dr. King said, that justice is love, correcting everything that stands against love. And I feel like you are involved in that work. You all are all involved in that work. So I really, really appreciate that. I want to encourage you, if you have questions, right? They are here to answer your questions. And so throw them in the chat, please. But I am not forgetting my brother Girmay, last but not least, to introduce yourselves, bills you're working on, and maybe a little bit different because your role is different because you're a King County council member and not a state representative. So you don't get to multitask and do bills while you're having this conversation. So please share with us, my brother, your role, your vision for the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much for the introduction. It's really great to be here with the NAACP. Shout out to everybody who made it for this call on a Saturday. And also shout out to my colleagues at the state level. I know they're keeping really busy in session. I couldn't do it. I don't know how they stay up until 1 a.m. every single night doing what they do, but that's awesome. Thank you. I'm Girmay Zahilay, King County Council member representing King County District 2, which goes from the top of the University of Washington through Capitol Hill, the Central District, South Seattle, the Rainier Valley, all the way through the unincorporated community of Skyway. And it's great to be here and represent the district that I was raised in. I actually grew up in South Seattle in places like Rainier Vista, New Holly, and also Skyway as well. So it's just a great honor to be able to represent the community where I was raised. I would say the top thing that we're working on the King County Council right now is response to COVID, making sure that people have what they need to survive. We've had such a crazy, tough year. So we've been passing legislation to support people with vaccine administration, rental assistance, small business support, behavioral health resources for people who are really struggling with the isolation and maybe they are resorting to chemical dependency just to manage all of the stress. The second thing, the biggest priority for me has been Skyway. It's an unincorporated community in my district. Like Kirsten mentioned earlier, it is the community that has the highest proportion of Black people in the entire state of Washington ever since the Central District has been displaced. And so I want to make sure that we don't talk about Skyway in the past tense like we do about the CD in many parts of South Seattle. We have a huge opportunity to make sure that we save this community, that we invest in this community, that we create the blueprint, the model for our state for how to develop and invest in a community without displacing the people who call it home. That's the great opportunity we have in Skyway. So we've had some major budgetary wins for that neighborhood, including $10 million for a community center, $10 million for participatory budgeting, which means the community gets to direct how those funds are spent, $5 million for affordable housing, $6 million to expand public transportation in a neighborhood that is largely considered a transportation desert. And so we have to make sure, though, at the same time that as we invest, like I mentioned, that those improvements aren't just going to new people who move in and push the people who have lived there for a long time out. So at the same time, we've passed the Skyway sub-area plan, which is a land use and zoning document to make sure that as we invest, we're putting in place anti-displacement strategies like just cause legislation, which keeps people from being evicted in unjustified ways, like right of first return policies, like mandatory affordability requirements for developers who are going to build housing in that area, and even downzoning certain commercial areas to make sure that big commercial properties and buildings don't come in and drive up property taxes and push out our elders and other vulnerable people. Another thing that we've worked on is gun violence legislation. We all know that because of generations of disinvestment in our communities, compounded by the economic effects of the virus, that there is an uptick in gun violence. And so making sure that we support community-based responses to public safety is something that I'm very interested in. And recently, the council approved my amendment to provide $2 million for community-based organizations that are out there keeping our communities safe without over-policing our communities. Another big thing that I'm very excited about is making sure that King County uses its underutilized publicly owned land and buildings in the most efficient way possible. If we have empty spaces and empty buildings, we need to transfer that over to community for things like housing and facilities. So we're working on an ordinance right now that would require King County to identify where are all the underutilized lands and buildings and spaces, and what is this process we have to undergo to transfer that for community stewardship for things like housing, like I mentioned. One big example of that initiative is something called the Youth Achievement Center, which we're working on in Columbia City to build a housing and resource center for youth in South Seattle, young people who are housing unstable, who are impacted by our criminal justice system, who are going through all kinds of traumas. And I could go on and on and on about things that we're working on, but I know I'm on a time limit here. So would love to partner up with anybody on this call to make our communities better. Thank you.
I know you're the council member for King County, but you might also throw in the mayor of Skyway in your title as well, brother, because no one was talking about Skyway. I feel like you have really, really, really focused on that. I counted up. Now my math might be wrong. I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician, but I count like $30 million that you've been able to get to invest in Skyway. That is real, real change. So thank you for that, my brother. We are going to transition now to the question and answer session, right? So I see a couple questions. I am going to always ask Kirsten Harris-Talley to go first because I know she has to bounce. And so but this is a question for all the panelists. Question number one is, how are you advocating for equitable access to education for our Black youth in the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic's impacts? Concerns are academic regression and adequate access to resources in a crisis, not just digitally, but food and housing too. So I will toss it to Representative Harris-Talley first.
Yes, thank you for this question. It's a great question. We know the disproportionality that Black students have in our public school system. And very early on started looking at bills that, let me be clear, everything that's happened with schooling with the pandemic has only made in more stark relief what was already issues that we knew we had within these systems. One thing is immediately wrapping resources, and let me be clear, these are resources available community-wide, not just to students in our public school systems, were food programs, and those have continued. I feel extraordinarily blessed that we were able to immediately have expansion of those and cementing those services through summer as well, because of federal funding that came through. So there was a $2.2 billion relief package from the feds that the House voted out, the Senate voted out very quickly. The governor's already signed, those dollars are already flowing. We also made adjustments to graduation requirements with considerations of distance learning and other considerations, not to quote unquote dumb down our graduation. I say that because that was the rhetoric that the other side was doing, but actually taking into consideration some of the gaps that seniors were going to have to expect in some of the standards that they met because of the limitations of distance learning. So made sure that we don't have any students have to worry that they're going to limit their ability to graduate on time. And then we also did a whole bundle of laws that will continue to have distance learning access happening for folks, and recognized through trades and other schools for those students who are then transitioning on in school. I also want to note that the truancy policies, looking at the school to prison pipeline, we've had to have a clear focus on those as we've been revisiting policies. We looked at shifts. The OSPI asked for shifts in the truancy standards and how that happens and how quickly courts are involved with truancy record transfers. As folks know, here we do have court systems that get involved with truancies, something called the Rebecca law from over 20 years ago. I'm going to be actually continuing to work with youth of color led by Black Minds Matter and others here in district through interim around school to prison pipeline and truancy policies, really trying to get to the heart of what we know are, the continuation of systems of harm happening in our schools, and particularly disproportionately in discipline coming down on students of color. So would love to keep partnering with folks here as well around those really core issues.
Thank you so much. Senator Saldaña, what's going on the Senate side when it comes to youth and education in the midst of COVID-19?
I don't serve on the education committee, so I do lean on Representative Harris-Talley to on the specifics. I think a couple of things. One thing that is a small piece, but I think is important, is our early education and increasing who can be eligible for receiving aid to be able to afford childcare, and specifically working with Councilmember Zahilay on a investment in Skyway with Pita Village. And this is Black led outdoor preschool that is establishing itself in Skyway, and I think is really important that, through, the importance of getting our young people into environments that are healthy, that are family centered. And so that's a small little project, but have been working. I do serve on the Human Services Rehabilitation Reentry, and so we did quite a few pieces of legislation through that committee about making sure that we are centering families, and so providing kinship care, supports, so that grandparents and others that are caring for their young people can actually receive assistance without having to get into the whole foster care system, making sure that we provide legal counsel to young people, at this point, and this is a Representative Johnson bills that came through our committee, at the point when there is an interaction with police at the very front to make sure that youth are informed about their rights, that we also are making sure that just thinking through a couple of the other bills that came through our committee, but making sure that people have access to healthcare and education, even if they are caught up into a system. So those are a few pieces of legislation that have come through that committee that are important to me. And I guess the last one is so much, again, it's around economics and youth, is the Working Families Rebate. So this is a piece of legislation that we've had on the books for 20 years, but never funded. We hopefully will be taking this bill up. It might be the last bill that we take up, to kind of like to set the mark about what we want people to remember this session about, but would actually fund a Working Families Rebate to folks, because we know that our families are disproportionately pay more in sales tax and other taxes, and so getting that money back into the hands and the homes of our communities is a priority for me as well.
Thank you. Toss to you, Councilmember Girmay, for what's going on at the county.
Yeah, one thing that I should point out is that King County has very little to no connection with the public school system. So usually that's through the school board and through the state, but there are a lot of ways that we support youth in general. One primary way is the Best Starts for Kids levy, which is a property tax levy that's coming up for renewal this year that will generate approximately $800 million for our young people across the 5 to 6 year lifespan of the levy. And this is the first time it's being renewed. So that means it has already generated around $65 to $70 million per year for the past 5 years, going through directly to community-based programs that serve our youth from prenatal all the way up to young adulthood, to make sure that they are healthy, happy, successful, and that their families are supported as well. This one that's coming up when it's renewed this time is going to have a childcare element to it, because we all know there is a huge lack of childcare resources in King County. And so to be able to support people who are at work or whatever it might be and supporting their children is going to be very huge. I mentioned the Youth Achievement Center already, where I'm working with community-based organizations to provide housing co-located with resources for our young people. Through these COVID packages, we've done all kinds of food and rental assistance to make sure that people are just able to stay above water during these extremely challenging times. The gun violence measure I mentioned as well, it's all about making sure that trusted mentors and advisors can go out and talk to our youth, build relationships with them, calm down and de-escalate beefs that might exist between people, do healing circles, activating spaces that are at risk for gun violence, and making sure that there's things like lighting and music and relationship building. These are all data-driven methods for keeping our young people safe. Lastly, I want to say that our young people today are probably the most brilliant young people in the history of our humanity. And I know Kirsten knows that with her youth team, but I go on tours of these high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, and their maturity and analysis around race and racism, poverty, systemic harm, it's as if humanity has leapt forward by decades, because I think due to their access to information and social media and just the things they've witnessed in the past few years, it has really enlightened them in a way that I don't think our generation or prior generations were enlightened. I say all that to say that it's really important that we empower them to be the change that they want to see, because they already know the solution. So one thing that I'm working on my campaign side, campaign hat, take my government hat off, is an initiative called Build the Bench, which works with our young people around the region to teach them how to run for office. You know, you have the ideas, you have the experiences, you know your community best. Now, here are the tools for you to be able to hit the ground, run for office, and represent the district or the community that you grew up in. And we've had 2 workshops so far. The 3rd one is coming up later this month. And it's been really exciting to see how engaged our youth are around running for office and shaping policy.
Okay, there is so much going on. Like, I don't know how you guys keep it all together. I mean, there's just so many different initiatives. You guys are involved in so much different things. I mean, my mind is like spinning and like thinking about, you know, where can we plug in and to be able to support you the best. Representative Harris-Talley, I know that you had to go. So is your time up? Because I want you to be able to say some parting words if you have a minute or two.
I do have just a couple more minutes, and I just wanted to bridge what Councilmember Zahilay just said. The way that I have seen youth organizing and engaging in the sharp political analysis that they bring is shaping so much policy. And I want to note that, you know, so much of the summer of protest with Black Lives Matter last summer, it is so clear how that has shaped the context of conversation at every level of government.
Yeah.
And I want to name that because it is young people at the front of those marches. It is no different than the civil rights movement in the mid-century. This is a continuation and standing on the shoulders and legacy of that work. It was freedom fighters, right? Teenagers getting on buses and driving to the South and sitting at drink counters that made the difference in segregation laws. And we're going to have the same legacy what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. The police tactics bill that just passed the Senate, that Councilmember Johnson brought through the House to reach that, is a game-changing consideration of what it is to say what we want policing to look like in our communities. That is a movement that unfortunately is touched by the blood of the youth in our communities, as well as the political sharpest way that they're showing up in protest. So I just say, I feel like good legislation is when we stand next to community and do what you all tell us to do and make it permanent, and then make sure the resources are there to implement it. And I'm just so proud to represent a district like the 37th that has such amazing youth and elders in the work standing shoulder to shoulder. And I'm just so proud to stand next to these legislators, but most importantly, community, to do this important work. So thank you.
Cool. She just drops the mic and she's out. Okay. Hey, thank you so much. You know, I love both of you hit on this vision for where our youth are today. You know what I mean? Because so many times people have this negative view about young people, but you really centering, like, no, this is the most amazing generation of young people we had ever. And it's great because I got a 5-year-old son. So there's like hope, right? For him. All right, take care. We have a couple questions that have come in, and I'm gonna have to throw this to you, Senator Saldaña, about SB 5226. I don't know how you guys keep all the numbers, but this seems to have something to do about driver's license suspension.
Yeah.
Would be love if you could speak to it. It seems like some folks have some concerns about it, so maybe you could kind of help flesh that out a little bit.
Sure, I can, and I am going. Oops, sorry. Audio on both sides. Okay. quick thing on this, and Martha Ramos is a warrior to address the issue of being penalized for driving poor, which is what driver's license suspensions 3 are all about. Is that if you can't pay your fines, then after a certain point they suspend your license and making it even more difficult for you to pay your fines and to be able to provide for your family, and really sets people down on a spiral. And so we've been trying to move this legislation since I got here in session. I got here in 2017 by appointment, and it was offered I think that year and every year since, and we have not been able to move it. This year, we finally got some traction, and Senator Solomon and I and Senator Peterson have worked it on the Senate side, and you know, a challenge, and we got it, and so we got it onto the floor of the Senate, and ended up having a bad amendment hang on the floor, which moved us a little bit further along, but still then at the end of the day, there was a loophole that then could still allow people to basically, if you don't show up for your hearing, or if you ask for a payment plan and then end up, you know, getting behind on that, there was, you know, after a certain point you would end up again in this position. But it would say to protect about 60,000 people, as I understand, even as it is right now. So we sent it over to the House hoping that they could maybe fix it, but there was a challenge, and so they did pass it off the floor, but I haven't had a chance to look at it. But I think according to, you know, the question, I assume it still has that loophole. This is our challenge, and Martha brings it up well about the power of lobbyists and the influence that they have. And so I would love, on my non-Senate thing, so I am on my personal Zoom over here, is that we do need to do a power map. We need to look at the PDC and who has oversized influence in decision making. And then we also need to change some of my colleagues. And I'm happy to talk about that after the session, particularly because we've got communities that are majority people of color. We have strong NAACP out in Yakima, in the Tri-Cities, you know, in Spokane area, and yet we don't have representation that actually holds our community in any regard. And they are making decisions, and they weigh us down. And so that a few moderates you know, end up having all the Republicans siding with them. And this is a challenge. This is a problem and it is delaying justice over and over again. And then we end up in really difficult positions. I serve as the co-chair of the Members of Color Caucus. I serve as the co-deputy leader of our Majority Caucus. And it is, you know, I am in more rooms and trying to make those, you know, push things. But at the end of the day, I have to convince the people that are sitting remotely on this other Zoom, 49 people, to make sure I get 25 votes. And so that is my unfortunate reality, is that as good as I want to move policy, and then we just have those decisions. Do we put a bill down, which I have done on multiple occasions, because it was leaving our community behind. And there's a couple of times this session in particular where I hear what my community is saying on a bill and saying kill this bill, but I also feel and experience through my own lived experience, but also my community, of what they want in terms of investments, in terms of real value, you know, whether it's education, whether it is cleaning our air, whether it is actually getting the money to be able to secure that property and build that Black-owned community anchor in Central District or in Skyway. And, you know, and so I think that's the tension that we have. How do we make sure that it's not doing harm? How do we make sure that it's moving us towards our vision for what we want to see? And where do you, and you know, I think that's our challenge, because I come with priorities, but then there's thousands of bills that are being introduced and hundreds that I have to make a decision on to vote. And if I'm going to like get the thing that I think is like the number one thing for us, whether it's the environmental justice or whether it's a particular project, there are some things that I can't give the attention and energy to, and that is something that is a real challenge. And I think that especially when we don't have the numbers, we as people of color in office either get tokenized or compromised and demonized. And so I think as folks that want to be in relationship and community and change power, shift it to what that quote that you said earlier, Stephan, was so powerful. I think that's what we need to do off session. And I know we all, and I think NAACP is in a strong position in particular because of your history, because of the new leadership and the energy that I see in the Seattle chapter to help us think statewide. Because for all the work we're doing, how do we get community passageways and all of and creative justice into places like Yakima and Mattawa? Because there is a different narrative there. And so I think those are the things in terms of how we actually change and make lasting power, not just like make a good splash and then end up 2 steps back. So I know I probably have to jump off too, but I really, really appreciate this conversation. And I see Kevin Allen, thank you so much for all the work that you always do to bring us together.
Right, so you got to bounce, Senator Saldaña. Well, peace. We're going to have a very intimate conversation with my brother Girmay now. It's all on you, man. You got to know state, local, federal, the whole thing, brother. Man, let's talk about community safety. We got a question in the chat about the current bail bonding system. And the question is, what can be done to replace the current bail bonding system that incarcerates poor people who cannot afford to pay bail?
Last year, I joined a coalition of governments across the country called Cities and Counties for Fines and Fees Justice. It's through an organization, I believe, called Policy Link. And that was exactly the aim. How do we get fines and fees justice? Because we can't have a system that punishes people for being poor. And that's what we have right now. So still working through that, still getting ideas from other counties across the country, but that is something that I'm thinking about. And if people listening to this want to work on that, please do reach out to my office, girmay.zahilay@kingcounty.gov. And then if we're talking about public safety more broadly, one thing that I would love to bring up are the charter amendments. I know many of you are familiar with them, but this past November, when you opened up your ballot to vote for things like who you want to be your next president, if you live in King County, you also voted on things called charter amendments. And those would allow us to create some really amazing change in our region. In particular, there were 2 charter amendments, Charter Amendment 5 and 6 on your ballot. One of them moves our region from having an elected sheriff to having an appointed sheriff. And the other one gives the King County Council the authority to implement changes in the duties of the sheriff's office. And together, what these would allow us to do is move from a system where we, as a default, deploy armed police officers to respond to everything. Right now we have a system, you call 911, armed police officers show up, whether they're responding to somebody going through a mental health crisis, or our youth who are getting into trouble in schools, or if you just want to check on your neighbor or have a noise complaint, somebody with a gun shows up. That's not really a system that we want, because that's how you end up with dead Black people. And we see that all around our nation, and it's a really bad system. So instead, hopefully we can have a system that looks more like a diverse menu of mental health options, a diverse menu of public health options. If somebody's going through a mental health issue, as a default, we don't need to send an armed police officer. We can send a public health professional. If people are calling police about property crimes or encampments and things like that I get a lot of complaints about, maybe we send a rapid response social worker who can connect people to the resources that they need to get out of that situation. If our kids are getting into trouble in school, maybe we have violence interrupters, trusted mentors who can respond to something like that instead of sending police into schools, thereby accelerating the school to prison pipeline. And so right now, because you all, the voters, approved and adopted those changes this past November, we're doing the work of implementing that vision by engaging communities and stakeholders all around King County to say, what is your vision for public safety? What should policing look like around King County?
Girmay, any other measures coming up this November that we need to be aware of on the county level that focus on criminal justice issues?
One of them is the Best Starts for Kids levy, like I mentioned before. As you know, putting massive investments into our youth is a great way of promoting public safety. When our young people have what they need to survive, they're going to live safe lives.
Got you, man. Going to the chat for another question. It says, what policies can be implemented to address the current measure of creditworthiness that uses zip codes / race as a determining factor?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, and I would love to learn more.
Yeah, don't look at me, my brother. I do not know the answer to that one as well.
But I'm taking notes on it.
No, for sure. Let's definitely take notes on it, because I think that's a really, really good question, and one that deserves. And I think it kind of does dovetail a little bit with another one of the questions that we have, which is, you know, I call you the mayor of Skyway. I'm just joking about that because there's been people who've been leading there for a long time, but I know that that is a special emphasis for you. But I am curious, like, what is being done to impact that area economically speaking, right? To get dollars in the people's pockets, because we know poverty drives so much of the things that we see. And so I'm curious if you could talk about economic empowerment in Skyway.
Yeah, well, first I'll say that all of those things that I had mentioned before, I think go a long way for economic empowerment. If people have good housing, if people have a community center that attracts traffic, that attracts foot traffic and more commercial activity that comes with that, that's going to be good for the local economy. If we have good housing and more public transportation, that means more people will come to Skyway, and that is good for economic activity. So all of those things are going to promote the economic activity in Skyway. But at the same time, we need to organize the local small business community. Skyway does not have a chamber of commerce. You know, if you go to other neighborhoods, they have a local smaller chamber of commerce that's the hub for the small businesses. And that's something that I'm working on right now to make sure that we have the resources that we need to create a center point or a hub out of a building that can be full of resources and information for the local small businesses in the area. And also those chambers of commerce, they attract investment. You know, there's so many instances where there's legislation that's passed, whether it's at the county level, the state level, the federal level, that says, hey, we want to invest in small businesses. We're going to invest through these chambers of commerce and to get into all the local small businesses in the area. The Skyway doesn't have one, so it misses out on these opportunities, and that's something that we need to do immediately.
We're going to shift focus just a little bit, but we're going to come back to Skyway. We have a lot of other questions that are coming in about Skyway, but this is a question about vaccines. It says, with vaccines being available to all adults on the 15th, what is being done at the county level to ensure equitable distribution of the vaccine?
Great question. So the first thing that King County Public Health did is locate community vaccination hubs in areas where Black people live. You know, Rainier Beach, there's going to be a vaccine hub there. There's one in Kent. There's one in Auburn, I believe. Areas that have high proportions of Black people, there's a vaccination hub there, as well as a testing hub. There are also mobile vans. That's a cute kid. What's up? There are also mobile vaccination vans that go around and drive to areas that have high proportions of people who are most at risk for the virus to vaccinate people on a mobile basis. Also, King County Public Health is partnering with several Black-led organizations to make sure that they help get the word out and bring people in to get vaccinated. So those are just a few of the strategies that are being employed by public health, but it can always get better. We all know that vaccine distribution is layered on top of hundreds of other racist systems. And so if we don't act to double and triple down on our equity policies, just letting our systems go as they usually do is going to get vaccines to mostly wealthy, well-connected, and predominantly white people. That's just how our systems work.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately, that is true, my brother. Let's switch back to public safety real quick. People are going back to work downtown, is the question. People are going back to work downtown. How is the county going to handle the homelessness and safety issues downtown?
One thing that we passed last year is something called Health Through Housing, which is a tax that was passed that will generate revenue for King County to be able to buy up empty hotels and motels around King County. We all know that this is really important because due to the pandemic, hotels and motels have seen a huge drop in occupancy. And so they've been cheaper. They've been cheaper to buy. At the same time, interest rates have been really low, so we can borrow money. All this to say that prices are cheap for hotels and motels. We can borrow money at a very low rate. Then we can buy up existing resources that are already move-in ready and target our most chronically unhoused population. And that's what Health Through Housing is going to do. It's going to provide housing to around 2,000 of the people who are most struggling, most likely to be living on the street, and get them indoors as soon as possible to get them the housing and support that they need to make a recovery. And so I think that targeting areas like Pioneer Square that have the highest level of racial disproportionality is going to be a top priority, because I don't know if you've been out there in Pioneer Square, but when I look around, it's really sad to see that the vast majority of the people I see look like us. And that tells you a lot about our systems, the way that our region treats Black people, how easy or hard it is for Black people to thrive in this county. And so making sure that we target our resources toward areas like that in Pioneer Square is a huge priority.
Huge. A little bit different question. I'm curious what your thoughts are about this one. It says, how do we improve trade? This is business-to-business relations with countries in Africa and the Black community. So how do we improve trade, business-to-business relationships with countries in Africa and the Black community?
You know, Stephan, I'm never going to be somebody who BS's my way through an answer. I don't know. I got to tell you, I don't.
Hey, you went to law school, but they didn't teach you that you didn't take the BS course in law school?
Yep, this is another one. I'll put it down on my list. You know, I have on my list the creditworthiness question and then the trade question too. I don't know, but if anybody has ideas on here, please do let me know.
Cool, man. We're going to go back to Skyway real quick. So can you let the audience know about the tiny houses that will be placed in the Skyway West Hill community and what is needed to qualify for one of those homes?
That's a great question. On what is needed to qualify, I don't have that right now in front of me, but I can get that information for you. For some of the people who aren't aware, there is going to be a tiny house village in Skyway in partnership with a church, a Black-owned and run church in Skyway. It's going to provide emergency and transitional housing for people who are struggling. One thing that the Skyway community made clear is that this needs to be housing for people in Skyway, right? Skyway is already a lower income community, already is home to the highest proportion of Black people in the state. There's a big need for housing. And so if we're gonna make a tiny house village there, it needs to be prioritized for youth and families and struggling people who are from and in Skyway. And that's what it's gonna do. Got you.
Got a question in the chat. It says, what is being done by the county to reduce the devastating impact of I-200 on African Americans and descendants of the enslaved?
Great question. I-200 has been extremely devastating. And
can you just explain for folks who don't know what is I-200?
I-200 is an initiative that passed, I'm going to say 20 to 30 years ago. I can't remember off the top of my head, but what it basically did is get rid of affirmative action in the state of Washington. So the state and public entities can't use race as a criteria Thank you, Kevin, 1998. So I guess the range was right that I had in my mind. If we're talking about state level contracts, for example, you can't target contracts based on race. As you know, if you don't have equitable policies that have an eye toward race, what's going to happen, again, if you just let inertia and people do what they do, it's going to not go to Black people. And that has had a devastating economic effect on our communities. There was an initiative called I-1000, I believe 2 years ago, that would have gotten rid of I-200 to make it so that we could have more equitable policies that are race-based and that allow people to market to people who are Black, and make sure that institutions like UW also can use race as a factor. And now we can't. I-1000 failed. I-200 is still alive and is still continuing to have a devastating impact. As you know, as the government, as a county government, we cannot advocate for a ballot initiatives. That's a campaign side thing, and you cannot use government resources to advocate for something that's going to show up on the ballot. But I do know that there are individuals and organizations out there that are trying to revive the next I-1000, and currently, I believe, collecting signatures, and hopefully we can get something on the ballot again to redo I-1000. I think that now in the environment that we're in, where we had the biggest movement for civil rights and racial justice this past year in the history of our country, our political environment is very different than it was a couple years ago when I-1000 failed. So hopefully we can get something like that on the ballot again and have more equity and justice and racial justice in our state with the passage of whatever the next I-1000 is going to be.
Man, you got at least one person, Girmay, who thinks you should run for Congress. And they need your voice in DC, but we need you in Skyway, brother. You can't go nowhere yet, man. They're trying to take our guy away from us, man. Come on now.
Change local level first and foremost.
There you go, man. Come on. Here's another question. What works currently being done in Skyway do you think could translate to changes in Seattle? So things that are going on, positive things you see in Skyway that could be translated over to Seattle.
That's a really good question. As some of you may know, I represent about a third of Seattle too. I represent the University District, the Central District, South Seattle, Beacon Hill, Rainier Valley, that whole area. But I don't have the same kind of authority in my Seattle parts of my district that I do in my unincorporated King County Skyway part of my district. Primarily things like land use and zoning. I can't determine how tall buildings are going to be, what kind of housing goes in a certain place. That kind of authority is the city council members who have that authority. So the lessons that we can learn from our work in Skyway that should be applied in Seattle is that we need to have a huge eye toward equity. Right now we have a system where different council members and different state representatives, they represent a district, right? And so because they're voted up to their position by that district, their incentive is to serve the people in their own district. But what that does is say that, hey, every one of these council members is fighting for their own districts, whether or not those districts have a high proportion of Black people, for example. What we need is to have an overarching commitment to equity. No matter what district you serve, no matter who elected you, your number one priority is to have a regional and statewide mindset around equity. We have family members out in Spokane who are Black. We have them in Tacoma. We have them around our state. So we can't just think about what district do we serve. We have to have this elevated mindset of where is the need the greatest, where have our systems caused the most harm historically and currently. All of us, no matter where we're elected, need to have that commitment to fight for those communities first and foremost.
Man, I love that you said that. It dovetailed on something that I heard earlier. I don't remember if it was Rebecca, may have been Senator Saldaña, talking about what's going on in Spokane and how that impacts their ability to be able to pass legislation here in Western Washington. Absolutely. And about how they have a few, moderate Democrats who may caucus with Republicans and, very, very concerning. So thank you for helping to like expand our thinking around that. Just have looking at the chat. Here's a question. What can be done to grant folks who are formerly incarcerated the right to vote?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a bill just went through the state and was signed by the governor to do just that. I read it real briefly, so I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but I think that was a bill that Representative Tara Simmons worked on and was recently signed by the governor. If anybody knows differently, please correct me.
I think you are right. Someone, if you can Google that and throw a link to the article in the chat, but I think you are correct about that.
Martha.
Here's a question, man. Again, everyone wants to know about you and Skyway, man. Will Skyway be incorporated with the city of Seattle, or can it be established as its own municipality?
That's a great question, and it's something that we definitely need to consider. As some of you may know, in order to be incorporated, it takes the people who live there to vote and say yes. And there was a vote that was put up maybe 10 to 20 years ago that Skyway voters had a chance to vote on to become, I think, part of Renton, and they declined it. And so I think that vote needs to come up again. One of the obstacles is that the neighboring cities don't think the tax base in Skyway can support the cost of maintaining Skyway. In other words, if you're a city and if a new neighborhood becomes part of your jurisdiction, suddenly you have to have the garbage people go over there, you have to have the light system go over there, you have to have electricity go over there, all kinds of services. And if they may be saying that the tax base there doesn't support the cost of that. But that's a really bad reason for not incorporating and including Skyway, because now we have a system where an arbitrary legal line between Rainier Beach and you go a few blocks down, suddenly the community that has the highest proportion of Black people is also the most underserved neighborhood in the state, possibly. I mean, Stephan, if you ever go and get in your car in South Seattle and drive from Seattle to Renton, halfway through your trip, you're gonna suddenly feel like, wow, there are no sidewalks here. Wow, buildings are way older. There's no housing development here. The small businesses look old and tattered and don't have the kind of upkeep that they need to attract business. So it's systemic racism, plain and simple, that the community that has the most Black people also is the most systematically disinvested from.
I know it sounds simple, but that's the first thing that came to my mind. It's like, well, duh, you know what I mean? Because if Renton was choosing, like, do we incorporate Mercer Island into Renton, right? It's a no-brainer for them. But yeah, so thank you for that. How can Skyway, is another question, Skyway again, how can Skyway get government economic assistance? And so I'm thinking maybe, I don't know if there's, and it's another question about grants. Can like Skyway apply for certain grants to be able to help improve some of the conditions there?
Yeah, there are small business grants available for small businesses in Skyway. King County doesn't have Office of Economic Development like the city of Seattle does. So it makes it a little bit harder to support small businesses in a more robust way. But through these COVID relief packages that we've been voting on, some of those have been going out in the form of small business grants. And when we did that last year, I actually walked around Skyway, knocking on the doors of small businesses, making sure that they apply and know that they're qualified for a little bit of small business support.
So we're going to switch a little bit. We're going to talk about affordable housing. What do you see as the greatest roadblocks in getting affordable housing in King County? And what steps do you see the council taking to ameliorate those concerns?
A couple of years ago, an organization called McKinsey, which is a financial consulting firm, released a report that said we need something like $1 billion, billion with a B, dollars every single year of public investment to create the housing that's needed to just keep up with our population growth. Right now, we're not coming anywhere near that. So when people look out and see the level of homelessness that people are experiencing in our region growing every single year, that's because we're not keeping up with the amount of housing that we need to maintain our population. And the cost of living is going up so much that people can't really afford to maintain housing, even if they were already housed before. And so it's going to be really difficult for King County as a government to solve our homelessness crisis, because we don't have the taxing authority we need to make that $1 billion a year public investment in housing like we need to. You know, King County Council, we can only raise revenue through sales tax and through property tax for the most part. And what does that do? We don't want to raise sales taxes because you're just diminishing the buying power of poor people. You know, imagine somebody who's really low income going out to buy something that they need, and suddenly they're being taxed to a point where they can't afford that thing anymore. And then property taxes are really bad too, because we have our elders who are on fixed incomes like Social Security or retirement, whatever it might be. Every year their property taxes are going up. That's going to have the opposite effect. We're raising property taxes to build housing, but at the same time, our Black elders in the CD and in South Seattle and in Skyway can't afford to live in the house that they've lived in for generations, and they're getting pushed out. So we're always in this catch-22 dilemma of, do we raise the revenue we need by, or do we, you know, potentially harm the very people we're trying to help? What we need is the entities that have progressive taxing authority, like the city of Seattle or like the state of Washington, to pass progressive taxes on the big corporations, taxes on the wealthiest, the hundreds of millionaires, the billionaires that exist in our state. And that way we can offset things like sales tax and property tax. And at the same time, then we'll be able to make the huge level of public investment we need to build the housing that we need. Because right now, as King County Council, we're always trapped in that dilemma.
Kind of building off what you just said, are you aware of any efforts on the state level or the city level in order to tax corporations, or, you know, a billionaire tax? Are you aware of anything in your role as a county council member? I mean, do you get to support those things at all? I mean, can you, you know, I don't know if you endorse them.
Yep, I endorse them every time I see them every year. And I also go down to Olympia when I can and advocate for them. I think recently there was a bill that would be a capital gains tax, you know, for the people who are making millions and millions of dollars on things like stocks. There would be a tax on them that would generate the revenue that we need for things like housing. I'm not sure, I haven't checked recently if that's passed yet, but if I'm just going off my gut and like headlines and things, I think it did pass, which is huge, you know, something that people have been fighting for such a long time. And it took once in a century crisis like the pandemic to show people that, hey, our systems as they exist have not been working, and they're harming people who, like Black people, who are disproportionately susceptible to systems harm. And so we need the progressive revenue to build things like housing and support small businesses to get through and survive something like a pandemic.
No, absolutely. It mind boggles that we have billionaires living in King County, and then we have people who have absolutely nothing. And like, that is, to me, is so problematic, and we got to bridge that gap. And so,
yeah, have you seen the transfer of wealth that's happened during the pandemic from poor and essential workers and low income to the people who were already wealthy and powerful before, on the scale of trillions, a transferal from the bottom to the top.
Wow. A couple questions from the chat. What do you think of an Office of Economic Development for unincorporated communities?
I think it's great, and it's something that I definitely want to work on.
Another person said, I heard people come to this region because we embrace those who are less fortunate. And what percentage of the homeless community has lived in the region for over a year? Is there a certain cutoff point? Do we need to send them back to the place where they came from? I know there was a bill at the council level in order to get people transportation back to their home city or town. Wonder if you could speak to that bill.
Yeah, so I'm not a supporter of things like that. I don't have the specific numbers about, what percentage of people are from here or not from here. One data point that I read a couple of years ago showed that most people are from the area, maybe not specifically the specific city or the zip code, but generally from King County. Yeah, the vast majority are. And so for me, I think we need to address the root causes of things. We don't need to be shuffling people around from place to place, because that's not solving anything. And the people who are looking out their windows and seeing homelessness as a problem or property crime as a problem, and those things are, we don't want people having to sleep outside. We don't want property crime to be an issue anymore. But if you're really thinking about solving those things, we haven't seen anything yet if we don't solve them. We just talked about the transfer of wealth that's happened during the pandemic. We just talked about the fact that we aren't investing the amount of money we need in housing. And so we're headed down a really scary place right now, where if you're wealthy and powerful in King County, you're gonna keep getting more wealthy and more powerful. If you're low income or poor or Black or any marginalized group, you're gonna struggle even more than you're struggling now. That's what the data is telling us. We all see what the trajectory of Black wealth is in King County. It's headed straight towards zero right now. We're not doing better given our current circumstances. And so when you talk about issues like just, putting people on a bus and sending them away, or sweeping people and taking them from point A to point B, that didn't solve anything. You're just shuffling an issue from one place to another. What we really need to do is have an equitable tax structure, build the housing that we need, provide the support that we need, support Black-owned businesses so that we can create the wealth that we need. There are a lot of core issues that we need to support and not just address the symptoms.
Got you. Another public safety question. The county has a pathway to zero youth detention. And I think you hit on this a little bit before in some of your prior remarks, but what is specifically being done to get us towards the place where we're going to be at zero detention?
I think it has a lot to do with those upstream things that I mentioned before. We have a lot of core issues: bad tax system, a lot of gentrification and displacement that's spreading our communities all over the place, and people are living really far from their support systems. We don't have the housing that we need. Black wealth is headed towards zero. Parents can't spend as much time as they want with their kids because they have to work 2 and 3 low-wage jobs like my mom had to do to raise us. And so there are so many issues that contribute to young people either making bad decisions or having trauma or fighting for resources with one another. And so we need to address those things first and foremost. Zero youth detention is not just about addressing the criminal justice system. It's fixing and making equitable every system across King County.
Yeah.
Second of all, we need more community-based solutions. There are so many organizations out there that are already doing great work to keep our young people out of trouble and connecting them to the resources they need to thrive. We need to support those organizations. And that's why I've passed things like that gun violence prevention funding that I mentioned to you before. That's why we have things like Best Starts for Kids, which I've talked about before. That's why we have things like the Youth Achievement Center, which will allow some of these organizations to operate in the same building and provide housing at the same time. At the end of the day, putting more police out into the streets and putting more investment into our jails and courts, again, it's just not going to address the root causes of the problem. That fire hydrant is going to keep just spraying us with water more and more and more as our systems fail. And we got to go and fix that before we just start addressing the downstream stuff.
Yeah, continuing on the theme of public safety, there's a recent call for the resignation of the King County Sheriff. Curious if you support that and why, or why not?
I did. This week I came out publicly and called for the resignation. And I called for that for a number of reasons, but most recently, the sheriff sent an email to her, sent an email that basically, in my view, was dismissive of a case where a deputy shot an unarmed young man, a 20-year-old Vietnamese American young man, twice in the back, and those shots in the back are what killed the young man. And so the comments that were made about that situation, I felt, don't resemble the values that we need at the top of the King County Sheriff's Office. We need somebody who's going to show compassion, who is going to hold officers accountable when they do something wrong, who is going to be a force for positive change. And we're going to get that by January 1st of 2022, because like I mentioned before, that Charter Amendment number 5 passed on the ballot, which will allow the King County Council, the King County Executive, and community stakeholders to appoint a sheriff who embodies those values that I mentioned before. But in the meantime, we can't have a sheriff who's making comments like that about a family and a victim who's undergone some of the most tragic things that you can imagine.
Thank you for that. I got a question about, so in the King County budget, $4.5 million in marijuana tax revenue is being redirected from law enforcement towards community-based programs in King County. Can you explain to the audience how the funds will be dispersed and who can apply?
Yeah, there's going to be a few different funds. There's that $4.5 million that you mentioned. There's also in the budget $10 million of something called participatory budgeting, which basically, to get rid of the jargon, means the community gets to direct how those monies are spent. And with both of those, there's going to be a community investment council, which is made up of community members in unincorporated King County, so Skyway, White Center, East Federal Way, and I think there are a couple other urban unincorporated pockets around King County. But there's going to be a committee of residents from there that get to design the process for how these funds are going to get out into community. So it won't just be these community members themselves on their own deciding, but they're going to design the process, whether that looks like creating subgroups of people who live in Skyway and White Center and East Federal Way. But those funds are going to be able to go to a bunch of really important things for the community through these community investment processes. If people want to apply to be on this committee, please shoot me an email and I can send you the application.
Man, we are coming closely to the end of our time. And so if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. I've got one other one. Folks want to know that the community center that you got in Skyway, where is it going to be at? Have they picked a location? And then when is it going to potentially be opened?
Great question. One thing that we heard repeatedly from community members is that a great location for the community center would be where the bowling alley is right now, the bowling alley building, which is like the iconic center of Skyway. And so King County's facilities management department is currently in negotiations with the bowling alley owner to see if he would be willing to sell that building so that we can repurpose it to be a community center. And I think that would be a great central location for a community center. And it could be just an anchor in Skyway for so many other things. We could have affordable housing right there. We have the grocery store right there. We have things like banks and food resource centers and small businesses right around that area. And we can truly have an amazing walkable neighborhood in Skyway where all the amenities are right there, especially now that we have extra funds for public transit to help people get from one place to another through the expansion of programs like VIA, which is that van program that would allow more mobile service for Skyway residents is just a great opportunity for us.
Well, my brother, we are coming to the end of our time. I just want to, if you could just wrap up, man, give us some closing statements. You know, this is your, Kirsten Harris-Talley, she dropped the mic. So this is your drop the mic moment, brother.
I'm not really great at drop the mic moments, but I will say that I just really, really appreciated the opportunity to come and speak with the NAACP. Thank you all for giving me the time. I look forward to your partnership. You are leaders in our region. Everybody on here is an expert in the communities that they live in. So let's collaborate. Let's get some good solutions out there. And I know a lot of you are already doing great work. Shout out to Kevin. I see you there, Kevin, always doing great work. Martha, all of you are awesome. And I look forward to collaborating with you. So please do shoot an email. Let's talk. Girmay.Zahilay@kingcounty.gov.
Hey, throw that in the chat, man, so everyone has it. If you just throw your email address, please reach out to them, hold them accountable, support them any way you can. That is the mayor of Skyway. I want to thank everyone, all of our speakers for this great conversation, and folks who submitted questions. Really, really thank you. We have a couple announcements. Now I forgot the announcements. They told them to me earlier and I forgot them. But I know one of them is we're going to be having a oh, here it comes. Look at that. There it goes. There's a COVID-19 vaccine day on April 24th, 2021 from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can see a phone number there. Reach out to us if you have more questions about this event. Send us put it in the chat. We're going to get the email to the NAACP in the chat so folks can have that. Any other announcements? Oh, here we go. Oh, we also have a financial empowerment course. You Take Control is a virtual financial empowerment workshop skills led by Elias and Gina Bullock. That is going to be on April 13th, 2021 from 6:30 to 8. And then, oh, hold on. Let me see. I think that's all the announcements that we got. So we can shut that screen down. As I mentioned to you earlier, this recording is going to be posted on Seattle King County NAACP's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube pages for those who missed the event live. So feel free to pass it on to them. Friends, family members, tell them to tune in. You can find these pages at Seattle King County NAACP. Again, that's at Seattle King County NAACP. There's also going to be a link on our website at Seattle King County NAACP.org. You can, so that'll be the link to the YouTube video. And folks, this is going to be the first in a series of town hall events that the NAACP is putting on. So we want to see you back. We'll keep you posted on things that are happening in the future. We'll be sending out an email about our next event. If folks have ideas, you have things that you like, people you'd like to hear from, topics that you'd like to be covered, let us know. Email us, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send us a letter. I don't care how you do it, but just let us know who you'd like to hear from, what topics you'd like to cover. That's all I got, folks. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Stephan Thomas. I'm gonna put my info too here if folks want to connect. It's at Prosecutor Steph is my handle. Feel free to reach out. Folks have any questions, any thoughts. I look forward to talking with you all soon. Peace.